All right, we'll take up here with curriculum-based measurement, which was where we left off or before our break. I talked about this a little bit in the first half of this session, but certainly curriculum-based measurement is one of the techniques that has been very, very effective at raising the performance of students who are low achievers. Oftentimes youngsters fall behind in school, and then the curriculum is above their challenge level. They really cannot do what they're supposed to do in class, and there's never any effort to teach them what they need to catch them up. And the whole purpose of curriculum-based measurement is to assess the student and place the student in the curriculum at the challenge level, and then make progress over time towards achieving long-term curricular goals that will catch the student up with others his own age group. So basically, it entails a standardized set of procedures that begins with the administration of a test to document student progress over this or these intervals that will lead up to the attainment of long-term curriculum goals, so that the student is no longer behind. And it has been found to be equally useful in reading and spelling and writing and mathematics and most of the basic skills curriculums that we use to teach students in elementary school. Now, we also talked a little bit about performance assessments and the types of measures of student behavior that rely on their demonstrating understanding of concepts and processes rather than just measuring a direct recall of what Bloom's taxonomy refers to as knowledge level of facts and information. Performance assessment is really most helpful when we're testing students who have retrieval problems and communication disorders and things of this nature that limit their verbal communication. They may be able to demonstrate to you or apply in an authentic setting a process that they are not able to describe and document to you in either a written or a verbal format. So keep in mind that having students actually perform these activities can be much more helpful than giving them a test. First of all, it's more relevant. It doesn't matter if you can tell somebody how to fix, how to figure out how many groceries, how much money it will take to feed groceries to how many people. If they can actually show you how to do that is a much better skill. You know, we've talked earlier about the fact that most school curriculum is really obsolete if students don't generalize it to authentic settings. And so performance assessments are a way of measuring performance in a more authentic setting, at least, than a pencil and paper test is. A performance assessment has some key elements. First of all, students are required to construct their own responses rather than selecting or identifying correct responses. You present them with the problem and they demonstrate to you a solution. They are the kinds of responses that teachers can observe. If you're interested in knowing how a student can apply a math problem, for example, rather than providing that student with a stated problem, present a problem that is a real life problem and that can be used to affect a solution to an issue that may be going on in that child's life or that child's real world. The student responses will show you patterns in their thinking and learning and all kinds of things, as well as whether or not the answer is correct. You can see how they are thinking and reasoning this out, and if they're having difficulty with a certain aspect of this reasoning, you can show them what to do about it. Of course, performance assessments are difficult to set up because these types of hands-on and problem-solving experiences are much more time-consuming lessons to plan than just a worksheet. But they also have a great deal to offer you that the more boring routine worksheet type of instruction that teachers fall back on really don't have to offer. So To set up a performance assessment, the first step is to determine exactly what you want the students to be able to do after it's over. Exactly, do you want them to demonstrate a construct? Do you want them to exhibit a process? Do you want them to perform a mathematical operation? What is it you want them to do? And second of all, what kinds of materials will be necessary in order for them to perform this task? And of course, this will be different depending on whether it's a science activity or a social studies activity. If it's a science activity, it may be something that has to take place in the lab or has to involve chemicals or other hands-on science elements, test tubes and Bunsen burners and so on and so forth. If it's social studies, it may involve maps or money or the integration of these concepts. And then finally, you must specify to the student ahead of time what the criteria are going to be to evaluate their performance. And we'll talk in your independent practice on this particular, for this chapter. The assignment requires that you devise a rubric for the test, but I want you to start thinking about rubrics, because one of the big shortcomings of performance assessments and essay tests and this type thing is that teachers aren't often objective in the way they evaluate student responses. So you need to figure out on the front end what it is going to take to have an adequate response. If it's a process, how many steps in the process have to be accounted for? Or is it an outcome? Is it the bottom line that makes a difference? But what are you going to look at to determine student success in this area? Now, the last category is a portfolio assessment. We talked about portfolios earlier as a systematic and organized collection of evidence that the student gathers together and organizes and presents to the teacher as evidence of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that have been acquired in a particular subject area. For example, when you do your portfolios in Quest 2, it will be a body of evidence that attests to your knowledge, skills, and attitudes and dispositions toward the teaching profession. If you're working on a student portfolio in reading, you might have them collect a portfolio of books that they have read and maybe illustrated, or you may have them do a writing portfolio that consists of poetry and a short story and various business letters and various kinds of written documents that may cover your curriculum, for example, in the 8th grade, if you're going to be a middle school teacher. So basically, the knowledge and skills that are demonstrated in a portfolio are governed by what content area you want the student to be able to document expertise in. But certainly, these can be very versatile areas and tailored to meet the specific curriculum that you're trying to teach. I mean, certainly an English teacher might have one type portfolio, and an art teacher might have a very different type portfolio, but both of them might be equally effective at documenting that students have actually reached all of the TEKS in that subject matter area. You could have an art portfolio that includes watercolors and drawings and oils and the different medium that students might be, photography, the different mediums that students are taught, and the same thing with music or science or whatever you're working toward. Teachers have to be careful to ensure that the judgments they make on portfolios are based on products that are reliable and valid indications of what is going on. Thank you so much. Portfolio assessments can also be used to document the performance of students with disabilities. They can even be series of videotapes that show student work in vocational or academic settings or a transcript of an interview. You might have a student collect a portfolio, for example, of skills that would be necessary to acquire a job. And the portfolio might be not only used for assessment and evaluation of the student's work in this particular class, which might be a pre-vocational skills class or whatever, but the portfolio could be something that the student would take with him that would be useful in referring to when he had to actually interview or apply for a job or fill out a job application, or the skills necessary for locating jobs, these sorts of things. So portfolios can serve multifaceted purposes. Certainly with our Quest 2 portfolios, we want students to be able to leave the Quest 2 experience with a set of materials and resources that they can then carry to their first jobs, that will be lessons and lesson plans and materials that are useful to them when they teach school. When you get your first job, you're going to be walking in a classroom that is pretty empty. You know, usually the teacher that has left that room has taken everything except the desk and the chairs, and so you walk in and you think, oh my goodness, I've got 7 hours to plan 5 days a week and all I have is my little portfolio. So you better make sure it's as full as you can get it before you have to go forward into entertaining 25 children for 7 hours a day. It's a big job. One of the things that we know is that students with disabilities don't particularly have good social skills. Many of them, we've talked about social skills training, we've talked about study skills training, and there's another skill genre really that students with disabilities tend to be deficient in, and that is test-taking skills. We know that many students who are low achievers really perform very poorly on tests, and they have not vicariously acquired a set of test-taking skills that make them very efficient and effective at demonstrating the information that they know. For one thing, many of them don't have very good reading-writing skills, and so often our tests in school require children to be efficacious in reading and language arts in order to demonstrate what they know in science, math, and social studies. So fortunately, this has been recognized for some time, and there are any number of studies that indicate that good test-taking strategies can be taught to students, and that all types of learners benefit from taking test-taking strategy courses and learning test-taking strategy skills. And you know that based on the fact that even students entering law school and medical school take the test-taking course. My son, for example, is about to get his real estate license, and so he signed up to take the crash course for taking the real estate exam because he doesn't want to take a chance on failing it first, so he's going to take that course because it is well documented that students on the LSAT and on the medical school exam and all of these tests, even very high achieving people, benefit tremendously from coursework and strategy and skill building sessions that are designed to increase their performance on these tests. Well, children with disabilities and low achievers in general certainly need this type of instruction more than almost anyone. And so we can teach them some things that they need to know that will enhance their performance. Another thing that often inhibits the performance of low-achieving students on tests is test anxiety. They have learned in the past that they don't do very well on tests, so they become scared of tests. They're inhibited. And one of the things they need is relaxation training and practice in reducing their anxiety during test-taking situations, making positive attributions, and teachers can help them focus their effort and strategies on thinking about what the answer is rather than worrying about what their score might be. Uh, Another thing is separate answer sheets. Most standardized tests require students to record their answers by filling or bubbling in. We've talked about that earlier. But we can allow students to practice these things over and over and over so they're doing them right. And this is one of the things in favor of what she said and why I try to encourage people, everybody, to meet the expectations of a learning environment in a normalized setting. What she was talking about earlier is the third graders weren't bubbling things in and she required them to do so. Well, this is a skill that they will need later in life, so getting them to do this was a very effective test-taking strategy, getting them to be able to exhibit that skill in a normalized environment. Now, if they can't do that, certainly we want to help them with it, but if they can, it can increase the probability that they'll be efficient test takers. Kids need to be taught to use elimination strategies. When you read a multiple choice test, you can almost always eliminate one or two answers. You just know they're not right. And if you can eliminate at least two answers that you know are right, you increase your chances of guessing the right answer from 1 in 4 to 1 in 2. So good elimination strategies are key to increasing the probability that even if you have to guess, your guessing will be more effective. And certainly we want to encourage students to guess when appropriate. I never cease to be amazed at the number of tests that say on there, we have a penalty for guessing. Do you remember that on the SAT or different tests you've taken? There's a penalty for guessing. Well, don't ever pay any attention to that. The penalty for guessing is about the same as the number of answers you will guess right if you guess. So they take off 1/4 of a point for every wrong answer. Well, if you can eliminate even one answer that you know is wrong, then your chances are 1 in 3 of getting the right answer. So don't ever pay any attention when they tell you there's a penalty for guessing. I always figure I have a little bit of edge. Surely I can eliminate 1 or 2 faulty answers. And so by doing that alone, you will increase the chances that you improve your score. Make sure that you teach students to use their time wisely. I think probably everybody in here has taken a test and realized they spent the first, maybe it was a 3-hour test, and they spent the first 2.5 hours on one question. And then all of a sudden they have 5 questions left and only 15 minutes. We do this when students take our comprehensive exam. When graduate students take the comprehensive exam, if I'm monitoring it, I always write down on the board 1 hour, 2 hours, so they'll be able to judge how much of the test they should have finished by now, so they don't get to the very end and have, 15 minutes to do half of the test. So these are skills that kids can learn, and while they don't really show us any more about what they learn on the test, they give them the same edge that everybody else has when taking the test and trying to demonstrate what they learn. Now, I'm not too big on acronyms, but I did think there were 2 or 3 in this chapter that were worth thinking about, so you might want to make a special note of them. Our teacher-made tests usually fall into about 2 categories. First is the objective test. The items on an teacher-made objective test are very similar to the kinds of items that you encounter on a standardized test. They usually include things like multiple choice items, true-false items, matching items. One of the strategies that your book recommends for improving the performance of low-achieving students on objective test is helping them, this is called the SCORER acronym, help them to schedule their time, to pick out clue words, to omit hard items and leave them till the last, to read very carefully each item. It is amazing sometimes how one word in a multiple choice item can change an answer from being right to being wrong. And if children are not particularly efficient readers, it's very easy for them to miss that word. So they need to read each word carefully. It's fine if they want to point at the words to the items that they're reading. Estimate what answers might be and eliminate any that are unnecessary, and review their work before they turn it in. You know, they need to read over it once, but you need to caution students, and you need to know this yourself. There have been lots of studies done on students' test-taking strategies, and usually when you change an answer, you change it wrong. So it is important to review your work, but be very circumspect about going against your first instinct. Mostly you're reviewing your work to make sure you understood the question the first time, to be sure that you identified the response you thought you did, and so on and so forth. But anyway, the SCORE acronym I thought might be useful to you because it's something you could actually teach your kids and post and give it to them so that they can remember. Written tests are, the other major category of teacher-made tests that we have. With a written test, students with disabilities and low achievers often have difficulty because they're very poor at reading and writing. Usually, written tests fall into two categories: those that are really essay exams that require a well-developed, fully articulated answer, and then the written tests that involve short answers. It's important to encourage students, no matter how little they think they know, to write something write some type of answer for everything. Even if it's just a partial answer, they may get some credit. It's for certain if they leave an essay item blank, they won't get any credit. It's important for them to use a scratch paper, brainstorm ideas, rough out an outline before they try to articulate a well-developed essay question. The acronym that your book recommends to help students write an effective written response is: study the question first of all, make certain you understand what it's asking, note each important point. Even with our master's level comprehensive questions, I'm amazed that sometimes students leave out part of the answer. So if I were teaching students using this acronym, I would have them underline each part that needs to be addressed with a separate sentence. Organize the information in what you're going to put first, what you're going to put in the middle, and what you're going to put last, and write directly to the question. I usually encourage students to rephrase parts of the question in their written response. In other words, if the question asks, name each of the continents and 2 or 3 of the countries or whatever, I start my sentence, the continents are, and teach students to write directly to, because sometimes they wander off and get some strange territory there and have difficulty. Now, the very end here, I want to talk to you a little bit about grading. I think that this is an important thing. I think it's one of the most important things we do as teachers. Not because I think grades mean a whole lot, but I think grades are important because they formulate students' concepts of their own efficacy. And I think giving grades to low achieving students is very, very important. And you will be working in a system that really goes against your efforts to help students who are low achievers catch up and do well in school. And I want to give you some things to think about with regard to grading. First of all, I want you to understand that we have agreed in this country on a system of grading students that says Everybody's agreed on this. The teachers, the schools, the parents, everybody's agreed on this. That we're only going to make the really good students feel good about what they do in school. How do you feel good about what you do in school? Huh? What grade? Huh?
The grade that's reflected on your report card.
And which one does it have to be for you to feel good about it?
An A.
Oh, it's an A. Yeah, it's not just any grade reflected on your report card. Huh?
No, it's A+.
And now it's A+. Now it's A+. We only really feel good about our grade if we earn an A, don't we? So, the kids who are making the B's and the C's and the D's and the F's, they're not going to feel very good about it, are they? We really assign A's based on the fact that the person with the A did the very best of everybody, right? Isn't that what an A means? What if everybody made an A? What do you think would happen if everybody made an A?
We all be happy.
Huh?
They make it harder. They would make the material harder.
That's exactly what they do in many private schools. They take in a very bright group of students and then they make the curriculum sufficiently hard that they force a distribution of scores. Because we've decided, I really don't think everybody would be happy if they made an A. Huh? I don't think so. I've been in classes before where I worked really, really hard and everybody got an A. And it infuriated me that the people who didn't do anything also got an A. It wasn't a reflection of how hard I'd worked or how much I'd learned. It was a reflection of the fact that it was just easier for the teacher to give everybody an A. So I believe that unfortunately we have learned to value A's in terms of how many people make B's and C's and D's and F's. And that parents in particular would be very unhappy if you were a teacher who gave everybody in your class an A. Because what we've agreed to as a society is that A's are only important and they're only valuable if they indicate that you're better than others. Well, this gives a real advantage to the best and the brightest, doesn't it? And one that I of course, I hate this philosophy for any number of reasons. I hate this philosophy of grading, but mostly I hate it because it runs the risk of making about 80% of the students in the room at any given time feel bad about themselves. Now, you can be relieved to know that they're probably not the children of school teachers. Because if it was the school teacher's kids, if it's your kids that's not making the A's and B's, you're going to be beating your little feet up there to talk about the students, find out what's wrong with the system, get this situation straightened out. So your little kid's going to be making the A's and B's, right? I was. I said, I know about this system. I've worked here forever. My little boy needs the best teacher.
In 7th grade, I was in private school. I was in a 7th advanced grade class, and everybody there could do the material pretty well. So somewhere in the middle of the year, they decided to up the grade level. And that's where everybody stopped making all A's and that, and I was one of them. So we started doing 8th grade level stuff, and that's when I started making C's and D's instead of A's. I just thought that was kind of unfair almost, but we were doing more than any of the other 7th grade classes in our private school.
Well, that story is a common one, and it's very much opposed to the way I believe schools ought to be run. But that's nevertheless the system you're going to find yourself in, is one where you have to have a distribution of scores that probably you're probably going to be required to have a distribution of scores. So you say to yourself, why are you telling us all this stuff? Well, the reason that I'm telling you this stuff is because I think that some of you will eventually be influential, and you will be decision makers in your district, and you will be leaders in your profession, and you will have a voice. And if you don't know what some of the issues are, you will think that schools are just fine that way because you made the A's already and your kids made the A's already, and so you think the system is pretty okay because it didn't cause you any particular pain. But of course what happens is that children or low achievers are ill pressed to change things around in this particular system, because what they would have to do to feel good about themselves is to go from an F to an A in a heartbeat. And most children are not capable of doing that. So one of the things I want you to think about today is, what are you going to do if you have this little kid who schleps along and does the least amount possible, sleeps through your class. Maybe he's one of those students who's made an arrangement with the middle school that he's going to sleep all day and stay up all night, so as not to cause you any problem and just fail quietly. And it gets to the good teacher part of you, and you say, I'm going to motivate this kid to learn my English or reading or science or whatever you teach. If I have to beat him to death, I'm going to make him do it. And so you talk and you talk and you work and you work and you motivate and you motivate and you encourage and you encourage and you cajole and cajole. And you finally get this kid to get it together and do some work for you. And so he works as hard as he can, and at the end of the 6 weeks, he's improved his grade. He's brought his grade up 20% from last time. So now he has a D instead of an F. What are you going to do? Huh? I might have to give him a B. I might just have to give him a B. Because I can tell you, a D isn't enough to motivate anybody. If you work and work and work as hard as you can and you change your grade from an F to a D, who cares? It's not worth it. Working as hard as you can to change your grade from an F to a D is not worth it. So I might have to modify what I did for him just a little bit and not let anybody know. What do you think? I'd have to see that he got at least a passing grade if he made lots and lots of improvement. And I don't know how I would juggle the paperwork to make it come out all right, but I'm pretty sure I could think of a way. Because I can bet you your bottom dollar that if you motivate a child and he works 6 weeks and does all his homework and studies for his test and he brings his grade up 20 or 25 points and it's still a D, the next 6 weeks he'll be back to sleeping on your desk. Because nobody is motivated by improving their grade from an F to a D. Nobody is motivated by that, and you're not motivated by it. You wouldn't be motivated by it either. I wish that we were in an environment where we graded students on how much progress they made, or we graded them on mastering their goals, or we graded them on some other measure of effort, so there was a way to be honorable and achieve wonderful grades without necessarily just being the smartest one in school. Yes, Lee?
One of my professors here at the U of H had said if anyone that had made an improvement of over 10 points from one test to the other, he was going to give them an A, and he did. And he exempted people from finals if they, and that's what happened from the second to the third test, because our grades had dropped on the second test. And so on the third test, he said if anybody improved their grade over 10 points, he would give them an A. And it worked, because many of the students really worked and improved their grades.
That's interesting. I think if you do some radical things like that, I've never heard of that. In fact, I don't even believe in that. I want everybody in my class to make an A, but they never do. You know, I wish they would. I wish you would all I wish you all thought this as important as I do and studied as hard as you possibly could and all made 100 on everything. And I would love to give everybody an A. It would tickle me to death. I would think I was the best teacher in the whole world if all my students earned an A. But the rest of the world is not on that page. But I want you to think about the possibility of the fact that there might be another way to run schools. You know, basically, schools have been run the way they're run now since my mother was in school. Everybody went to school when they were 6, only now everybody goes when they're 5. And everybody's supposed to do exactly the same thing in kindergarten, exactly the same thing in first grade, exactly the same thing in second grade, and exactly the same thing all the way through. The biggest determiner of what experience you're going to have in school depends on your chronological age. That's how we decide what you're supposed to learn in school, and I don't think that's the best way. And the best way we decide on grades is that the smartest kids that do the very best in the class get all the good grades, and the other kids, no matter how hard they try or what other wonderful attributes they have, they don't get that recognition. Their mother never gets the bumper sticker that says, my student's on the straight A honor roll at Lamar High School. So I want you to think about trying to motivate some of these children and think about how in the environment, the culture, the school culture that we live in, how you can recognize the effort and achievement of low achievers in light of the grading realities that we have to face. Because I can tell you one thing, that a grade that goes from a 55 to a 65 in 6 weeks is not going to motivate a child who's been an underachiever. And these students often feel helpless to achieve high grades, and they blame themselves for failing in school. And the extent to which we can modify and use grading to motivate them to learn more, they may eventually become very proficient students. In order to make modifications, though, you will certainly need to consult your school and your district policies to make sure you're within the realm of acceptability that's called for. You will have to follow certainly all procedures stipulated in a student's IEP. Sometimes a pass-fail grading system can be useful so that the comparisons between high achievers and low achievers are not so obvious. And sometimes we can structure learning so that the student passes without modifications. We just become better teachers so that they make wonderful grades without modifications. And certainly in this case, grades serve as a great source of pride for the student. Some additional considerations, depending on how you feel about it, may be using a double standard approach. Consider grading differently for certain students depending on what they know or don't know. I personally like to the notion of expecting challenge level work out of everybody and grading on the basis of how much achievement has taken place at the student's challenge level rather than on the basis of who is the highest achiever. Contracting, you may grade a student based on a contract. He may agree that he will accomplish this much in this period of time for this grade. Independent study sometimes addresses special needs by allowing the student to set independent study benchmarks and determine what they're going to learn, and then evidence demonstrate for you that they can do it. You might use a decision-making model, which is a systematic approach to judging children with disabilities basically on the measure of effort that they exert and the determination they have to do better. So that's it for assessment. Right now we're going to do our last guided practice, and I'll turn that over to Kim.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, we're on Chapter 12, our guided practice, and it is on assessment, as you have learned about already from Dr. Goodman. I want to say, give a special notice that assignment number 12, please check and double check the due date for assignment number 12. There will be a shortened than usual time to complete this assignment because it is the end of the semester and grades will be due, etc. So please check the exact assignment date for assignment 12. It'll be different from the other assignments that we've had thus far. I'm sorry? It's already on there. Yeah. It's already been, I put it on WebCT this morning, so it's there and ready to be read and done. Just check that due date for that. I don't want anyone to need assignment 12 for their fourth assignment and turn in late and have it not be counted. So make sure you check that due date on there. Dr. Goodman was talking about when we have students taking standardized tests, adaptations, and one sprung into my head. I had a student with Asperger's syndrome who we had written their IEP that he could have someone familiar with him when he was taking the TAKS test. I really wanted him to take the TAKS test. I felt he could do it. And so the adaptation we made for him was someone could be there that he was familiar with, and that was me because I worked with him a lot in the school setting, and he could be verbally or visually encouraged while he was taking the test. So the first time, I had him over a couple years, and the first time he took the TAKS test, after every single question, he would look up to me and said, "Am I doing okay?" So "You're doing fine." "Am I almost done?" "You're almost done." After every single question, and over taking the TAKS test or the reading and writing and science, we phased it out. So every other fourth or fifth question, he'd look up and say, "Am I doing okay?" "You're doing fine." Until finally all we had to have was a little visual cue on his desk with a little thumbs up, and whenever he wasn't sure, he'd just look and say, "Okay, yeah, I'm doing fine, I'm doing okay." So those are the type of adaptations that you can use and even phase out for students, so that makes them more independent as they go on in school. So that was one that sprung into my head. He might have been a student 10 years ago. They said, "Oh, he can't take those standardized tests." Whereas just little adaptations we made him capable of taking those tests. So always think about those things for your students with disabilities. Teacher-made tests, when teachers think of teacher-made tests, "Oh, I'll just write a test for this chapter. I don't really like the one that's in the book that the publisher gives me. I'll just write a test." And it sounds like something that may be really simple to do, but it's not always simple as it sounds to write a very good, effective teacher-made test that really measures what you want to measure with your students. I like this quote. It's from a book, How to Assess Authentic Learning. "Teacher-made tests can be important parts of the teaching and learning process if they are integrated into daily classroom teaching and are constructed to be part of the learning process and not just a culminating event." This has two parts. First of all, are you teaching the way you want your students to think? Are you just tossing out facts to them and expect them to give them back to you? Or are you teaching them to think on a higher level? If you're teaching the students the way you want your students to think, are you assessing your students the way you teach? Okay? Don't expect your students to be able to do on a test something you haven't taught them to do. Don't expect your students to be able to think in a way on a test, some of those higher level thinking skills in Bloom's taxonomy, if you haven't taught them how to think that way. So keep that in mind when you're making these tests, when you're doing teacher-made tests. Also, it should be not just a culminating event. Okay, we took the test, let's go on to the next thing. Dr. Goodman pointed this out when she was lecturing today. That test is a reflection, the results of that test are a reflection of how you have taught those concepts or those facts or that information. So let it be not only a teaching tool for you, how can I better teach this next time, also an assessment tool to see where the students need remediation. So make sure you use your assessments in the right way. Not, "Oh, well, these are my test grades, on to the next section. Well, these students need remediation, these students have it, we'll do some." Remember when we did the assignment with the higher level, what would you do for these students? Lower level, what would you do for these students? That's a good thing to do with those test grades. Teacher-made test guidelines, we've already reviewed some of these. Students should be aware of the purpose of the test. Clear directions must be given for each section of the test, and we're going to look at some examples of this a little later. Make sure your students know what they're supposed to do on the test. Nothing is more frustrating for a student when they're taking a test not to quite know what the teacher wants. I had a doctoral class last semester, and the way he wrote his assignments, I just wasn't quite sure what he wanted. And every time I'd have to go see him and say, what exactly are you looking for here? Because I didn't feel like the directions were clear. What am I supposed to do on this section? What am I supposed to do on this next section? The structure of the test should make it easy to read and follow. Vary your questions in difficulty and vary your question types. Of course, you have true, false, and sentence completion, and essay, and multiple choice, and matching, all the different kinds of questions you can have. Tests should reflect an appropriate reading level. If you have third graders, make sure the reading level of the test is on a third grade reading level so those students can read it. And your students with disabilities, as Dr. Goodman pointed out, if you're not testing reading, whether they can read or not, go ahead and make some adaptations to that. So you're testing what you actually want to know that they know. Of course, make allowances for students with special needs. Tests should give students some choice in the questions they select or their response style. I'm a big fan of, especially on essay type questions, giving students a choice. Okay? If it's a compare, you want them to compare and contrast. Do you want, maybe they could choose to write it out. Maybe they could choose to do it in a Venn diagram. If you've taught them to do Venn diagrams and how to compare and contrast and things that are similar between these two concepts. Maybe they, instead of writing a paragraph, they could draw a little story web if you've taught them in your class how to do story webs. So give students a choice of how to give back that information that you're checking for. Tests should vary levels of questions, including processing, applying information. Otherwise, make sure they're just not shooting back facts. Okay? But of course, make sure you've taught them how to do that higher level thinking. And of course, students should have sufficient time to finish. We are going to look at some poor examples that do not follow these guidelines for making teacher-made tests. And I want you to, for each one, I'm going to just give you a couple of minutes to revise the question or the item on the test to what you think it would make more sense. What would be a better test question? Let's take a look at the first one. This would be, we're going back to our insects. I thought we'd go back to what we were talking about when we did mnemonic devices. Mark the right answer. All insects have, and then you see all the choices there. Just take a minute or so. How can I revise this question so it's a better test item? Go ahead. I'm going to give you 1 minute to kind of write it down so everyone can think about it. How can I revise this to be a better test item? Okay, let's see what everybody thinks. Would you like to go ahead? Person that raised your hand, go ahead.
I would have asked, all insects have the following except, and then list the following answers, but not give D and E. It would be too confusing.
Any other ideas? Yes, ma'am.
Instead of having but not the C or but not the B, you can put only A and B or only A and C.
Okay, kind of revise doing it that way. Okay, how many of you hate multiple choice questions like this? Raise your hand. Yes, I hate these. And you know what? Kids do too because they're very confusing. A and B but not C, B and C and sometimes E. Oh, I just hate those. Okay? Those are two ways, the exception one and rewording how you do. I just decided to do it this way. And that way they have 3 choices and one of those choices is correct. Also, what did I do in the directions? I put a circle around circle, so that's kind of a clue to students. Oh, circle, okay, because you'll have students that won't read directions or students that are unable to read direction words. And that gives the kids a clue as to exactly what they're supposed to do. Let's look at another one. Is the statement true or false? And I have a statement, insects are not found on every continent on Earth, true or false? Take a look at that for a minute and think about it. And I'm going to have someone tell me, first of all, someone tell me what's wrong with it. There are several things wrong with it, actually. Go ahead. Why don't you press your microphone so we can all hear?
It says not, which can be confusing to people.
Those negative true false questions, very, you go, well, ants are not found. So, no, maybe that's what's true, but they're not found. It's false that they are found, but no. It's just very confusing, those negative true false questions. What else is wrong with it? If you think like a second grader.
Just having the T and F very close, I would probably put true and then like on the next line false.
Also, how am I supposed to tell you? There's no, do I circle it? Do I write it? Do I put an X through it? The directions aren't clear, okay? So make sure on your test your directions are clear and everything's set up so it's very clear to the student what you want. Okay? It's not fair to students to mark a question wrong when you haven't given them clear directions as to what you want. This is how I would have changed it. Circle T if the statement is true, circle F if the statement is false. If the statement is false, rewrite the sentence so it will be true. I like doing this because on true-false it's so easy to guess. Okay, I'm not a real big fan of true-false questions in the first place on tests, but if you want to use them, if it is false, have them tell you why and have that be one of the points that they can earn on their test. Okay, so on this one, insects are found on every continent on Earth. We got rid of the negative, and that would be true, and the student would circle true. All insects have 8 legs. The student would circle false, and then rewrite the statement so it is true. All insects have 6 legs. So that lets the student, yes, that's false, and this is the correct information, and that's an opportunity for them to earn some more points on the test. Some more helpful tips. When you use sentence completion items, especially for students with disabilities who may have recall problems, give them a word bank to pull from. Okay? Do you all remember taking those sentence completion and trying to come up with the word? Okay? Those students with disabilities, or any student really, give them a word bank to pull from. Okay? So they can look up and see maybe if that word they know, but they just can't remember is in that word bank. Matching items. Have you ever taken a matching test and there's like 25 in each column? Oh my gosh. It's very difficult for us. Can you imagine for a third grader who has a learning disability? Okay? So break those matching items up. Don't do more than 5 or 6. So if there's 20, break them up into sets of, 4 sets of 5. And that student will have a much better chance of thinking through and getting those answers right and show you that they know the information. Also, I think it's helpful to have students highlight key words in the instructions or in the essay test. And Dr. Goodman mentioned this also. Have them highlight exactly what's being asked for in the instructions, exactly what I'm supposed to do. And that not only makes them reread it, but they can look back up and see their highlighted instructions and remind them what they're supposed to be doing. And also give examples. For example, on the true-false example we just did, have an example of circling false and writing the correct thing so they can look back up and say, oh yes, that's what I'm supposed to do on that one. Let's take a look at essay questions on tests. You can start using essay questions in first grade. Okay? I think essay questions can be very useful in school because the students have to do a little bit higher level thinking and they have to come up with what they think the answer is to a question. It kind of gives you insight into kind of how much they really understand about what you've been talking about in class. I think they're especially effective once you get into 4th and 5th and then middle school grades also. Okay, look at this essay question. Describe metamorphosis. What's wrong with that? Oh, so much. Who can tell me? Lee?
Well, I don't think where do you start? What stage are we starting at? I mean, you know, describe metamorphosis. There's so much you could tell. I mean, what animal? What, you know? What do we do? Where are we going with it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would. Well, okay. Where do you want? What animal? Where do you want me to start? What do you want me to tell you? Okay. So it's not detailed enough. It's not clear. The students aren't going to understand exactly what you want. Instead, maybe we could have something like this. Think about the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly. Draw the changes the caterpillar goes through. Write a label under each picture. Squares have been provided for you so they know exactly how many steps you're looking for. And the first one has been done for you. Okay? This is much clearer as to what the teacher is expecting. Students know exactly what they're supposed to do. You've probably done it in class several different ways. So this will give you a better picture of what the students understand. Dr. Goodman also talked about rubrics. Okay? How am I going to grade this? It's really important essay questions. And believe me, as parents, I really appreciate getting a rubric on a project or a test, so I know exactly what that student is looking for, especially with me because I have a daughter who comes home and kind of does this. Well, what are you supposed to do on the project? Okay, so if you she's real good at that. These muscles must be very well developed in my child. So if I have a rubric, I can see from that teacher exactly what that teacher is expecting, okay, the product to look like. What kind of things would you have for a rubric, a grading rubric for this question on a test? What would you give points for? You don't tell me how many points or anything like that, but what would you give points for?
Having each stage. Having each stage a picture in each box.
Sure. Did they have all 4 pictures? What else? What else are you going to grade on? I know you're thinking of one. Yeah.
The labeling I wouldn't count off for like spelling because it's not a spelling test or something.
Good. Are you going to count spelling? Is that something you really wanted the students to be able to do? Is spell every stage of that metamorphosis? Or maybe you won't count off for it. Maybe you'll give them a word bank. And if you gave them a word bank, well then I will count off for spelling because they ought to be able to copy. It's up to you as the teacher. Anything else? Are you going to count off if the picture's not well drawn? That's up to you as the teacher. Are you going to count off if it's out of order? I would think so, because you want them to have the correct order. Okay? So those are all the things you need to think about to be fair when you're grading it, because you can't take off for spelling on one student and not for another, unless that student has a disability and before you have established that you're not going to count spelling on that student's assignment. Okay? So rubrics improve your objectivity when you're grading, and parents love them, and they make grading a lot easier. When I grade your assignments for this class, I go right by that rubric that I include at the end of your assignment. It makes it much easier to be objective about what you've included or what you've left out in your assignment. The assignment for this chapter does have to do with designing a teacher-made test for a subject, and you'll see it when you read the assignment. And guess what? Grammar and spelling count, because do you want to hand your students an assignment with misspelled words in it? Never. One of my pet peeves as a parent is getting things from school with misspelled words or incorrect grammar. Oh, it drives me nuts. You should have, oh, Mom, it doesn't matter. Oh, it drives me nuts. That's one of my pet peeves. If you are a teacher giving students papers that are going, especially if they're going to go home, but even if they're not, make sure everything's spelled correctly and everything's grammatically correct. So I'm going to be very, very picky on these assignments that you've done this for that test. I want you to actually design the test that you would give to your students and include these guidelines, and these guidelines are repeated. You'll see them in your assignment for Chapter 12. Are there any questions? Okay, good luck. Have fun.
All right, thank you, Faithful, for standing in here with me all this time.